Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Gerbi. I'm so excited to have you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I think that this is such an interesting conversation, and I really love what you're doing. So, before we dive into questions, can you set the stage for guests a little bit about what you're doing and your journey into prenatal health and coaching?
Sure. I have been a perinatal chiropractor for 15 years. My mom was a nurse midwife. I always knew I'd be a physician. I swore I'd never work with pregnant women. And then I grew up in her perinatal clinic, which was next door to my school. So I was like, oh, no way. And then I got to chiropractic school and I was like, who needs non-drug, non-surgical care for musculoskeletal pain more than pregnant women? And then at the time, I guess it's 20 years ago, it was still a much more male dominated profession. So my colleagues had no interest in treating women. They felt like there was some like magic eject button and they were going to like mess up a pregnant lady. And at the same time, a lot of them were starting families while they were in school. So the guys were in school and their partners were at home having kids. And then they were all at the student health center. So even as an intern, I really just started treating moms. And then they'd bring me their babies. And I was like, I don't know what to do for your baby. And they're like, you're going to go get trained because I trust you. So I got into baby work, which is really non-force, very gentle. And then it just kept evolving. And then I had my own two kids 10 and 13 years ago. And I got really into breastfeeding issues and feeding issues. And really, my perspective of feeding is that it's one of the first biggest hurdles that new moms face in terms of what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And depending on their preconceptions of what they think or how they want that to look, if they succeed or fail, I think it's one of the first big things in motherhood that makes them either feel capable or really knocks them down. And so for me, even though I'm a lactation consultant, I'm not a like everybody needs to breastfeed. Let me just educate you more about how good breast milk is. It's really about it's a tool to help you feel confident, empowered as a mom, help you feel like you can make good decisions for your baby and feel like you have your feet under you. And it's an issue that every few hours you have to make a decision. Are you going to pump? Are you going to give the baby a bottle? Is it going to be formula? Are you going to try to breastfeed? And anyone who's listening to this who's struggled with feeding issues, it's unrelenting. And there's other postpartum issues that you can shelve. I always use the example of pelvic floor things. Moms might leak a little bit when they cough or laugh, but they're like, I'm going to wear a pad and figure it out in a couple months. But like the feeding stuff you can't postpone. And I really got into feeding issues for that reason. And then became a lactation consultant on top of it. And then it was really my clients started asking me, do you know anyone who does what you do in Texas? Do you know anyone in Alaska? Do you know anyone in Florida? And at the same time, I had all these moms come in and they were like, your hands-on care is amazing, but it's the advice. It's how you're helping me think through this. It's the education. And I really realized that the postpartum period, women go from this hyper focus on them in the healthcare system. We see you every month and every 2 weeks and every week. You've more doctor's appointments than you ever have in your life. And then you have the baby, and it's like everything drops away. And at that 6 week postpartum visit, there's usually a lot of stuff going on, or as it actually is brewing but hasn't manifested. The
Hmm.
healthcare system is not set up to support new mothers.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, baby has one physician, mom has another. If you've been with an OBGYN or a midwife, and God forbid you've had a couple kids closer together, you may not even have a primary or have seen a primary in years. And the way the system is set up, everybody washes their hands of you. And a lot of women are left with things they're told that's common, that'll go away, keep trying. And there's just not a lot of actionable advice. And it's no fault of any provider. And I really want to emphasize that the healthcare system is not set up to allow for the time and space to sit down with people and really help problem solve. And there are so many physicians like myself, even more allopathic MDs, and we're all just so frustrated. Nobody got into this because they want to see a person in 6 minutes. Nobody got into this because they just want to write a prescription and not talk to them about diet and lifestyle. But the system is so broken, that's where we're at. And so women are just starved for information. They want to know, is this normal? What do I expect? What's coming next? And there's like tons of people throwing advice at you, but I feel like there's not a lot of help with a framework.
Hmm.
And the apps and the books and all of that is really helpful. But at the same time, I think what we've lost is this sense of your baby hasn't read the books on how long they should sleep. Your breasts haven't read the research on how often they should be producing milk. And we get so caught up in it that we lose some of the instinctual part of this. And that's really why I got into coaching, is to help women connect the two, right?
Hmm.
So I always say, like, my approach is driven from science, but it's also steeped in the heart. There
Hmm.
has to be a blend. And it's also a time in your life where you're exhausted. Your body has just done the most physically amazing, but usually also challenging and hard thing it ever has. And you're wearing all these new hats. If it's your first kid, you've never been a mother, it changes everything. It changes your relationship. And so I think it's really a time where women truly need coaching. And I was like, I can do this from anywhere. I can work with women anywhere with this. It's so cheesy. Doctor means teacher, but it's true. And I love teaching. And so that's how long-windedly I ended up in coaching. And so I still have a hands-on practice, but I
Hmm.
also work with women all over, just with the most common struggles that new moms face. And
Hmm.
everybody wants to work with you when you're pregnant, but it can be messy postpartum. And everybody just gives them a little carrot, like, oh, just sleep when the baby sleeps. That's great. But if your kid doesn't sleep, what do you do? And so those are the women I love helping the most.
Yeah. What you're doing is so important and it's so fundamental to who we become as mothers, and who we become as mothers impacts our children and that impacts society. So I think this is just so pivotal what you're talking about and what you're working on. I know that we only have a limited amount of time, but what are some of the common misconceptions or surprises that you think new moms don't anticipate? And what's a way that maybe they can approach them to feel more confident?
That's a great question. I think the big first one is with the birth,
Mm.
that because sometimes I think that women equate education and planning with sort of a guarantee that things are going to go more smoothly. Or I've exercised, I've done my yoga, I've done all my hip openers, I've taken all the right birth classes. There's no reason that I would have a C-section or I would have a long labor. I was one of these mothers. I was like, oh, I did all the right things. I'm a big lady. I got German and Italian hips. I'm going to cough and have this baby. And that was not the case how either of my kids came into this world. So I think that's the first thing that can blindside us, is that we're in partnership with our babies during delivery and things happen, and not in a fear-based way,
Hmm.
but that I think that just to be open to the possibility that you may need a lot more help than you realize. And I'd really rather have somebody over plan for help and not need it than under planned and be totally sideswiped. And so if I have women that have family in the area, I'm like, are they actually helpful? And can you ask for help? So sometimes they'll say, oh, yeah, I have help. And I'm like, do you have somebody that you can look in the eye and say, can you take the stinking breast milk covered, barf covered sheets off my bed, wash them, and remake it? And if you don't feel comfortable asking for that, then can we write these all down and put them in a jar and have somebody draw it? Do you feel comfortable asking somebody to vacuum your floor or unload your dishwasher? And so sometimes women need to do a little work around that themselves, right? Letting go of some control, or what does that look like? And if that's super uncomfortable for you, then what else can you do? Do you need to hire somebody? Do you need to pay somebody to do that? Does that feel comfortable? Food prep. Do you need to do a meal train? If you don't have family, then let's figure out a meal delivery service. Or every time you make dinner between now and when baby comes, make double and freeze it. Just little things like that. I think that's a big one, is just that you really may need a lot more time to recuperate. And then the second one for me is really that at 12 weeks postpartum, we're all ready to go back to work. 6 weeks for a lot of women now is becoming more and more common. And I tend to find that anybody who has some speed bumps, whether it's a delivery that maybe hadn't gone as expected, or sometimes delivery went great, but mom might have hemorrhaged and lost a lot of blood, but not enough to need a transfusion, or baby might have had some complications, or baby's been struggling with a lot of feeding issues or really colicky. Sometimes those issues aren't quite sussed out, or they're not like they're syncing up, but they're not really synced up
Hmm.
until about 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks sometimes postpartum. And then they're gearing up to go to work. And again, if you can take another month off, if you can have a little bit of wiggle room, or I always say when women are asking me, I'm like, can you leave yourself some flexibility? Can you leave a gray area? Can you say, well, I'll come back at 12 weeks, but I'm going to do half time for 2 weeks or every other day, just to give yourself a buffer. And I do find that the more successful, driven career women are like, that's for other women. I can do it. And it really rocks them if they're struggling and they're just pushing. So I think a little more time. And then I also really want people to hear that postpartum and perinatal mood disorders are real. Like 1 in 5 women will struggle with postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, intrusive thoughts, OCD, all the way down to more significant things that are far less common, but bipolar and postpartum psychosis. But that these are real issues, and they creep up on women, and often they creep up after everybody is gone. And after that 6 week postpartum check, once nobody needs to see baby again until 4 months, and moms are really struggling and they're developing mental health issues, especially if anyone who has a history of anxiety or depression, and they think that there's just something wrong with them, or they're not enjoying having a baby, or they're at a real personal low, and they just suffer in silence because they think they're the only one dealing with this issue, and they are not alone. It is so common, and it's due to a whole list of factors that like we could do a whole nother episode on.
Yeah.
But I just really think that is a much under discussed component of the postpartum period. And when you start talking about it, women come out of the woodwork and they're like, oh
Hmm.
my, I was so depressed and I just didn't want to tell anybody. I thought I was being a bad mom. And it's no, these are hormonal imbalances. These are just huge things that are very treatable through a number of resources. It doesn't have to be medication. It doesn't have to just be going out for walks and napping when the baby walks. There's a whole rainbow of things that can be done. But I think that's another one that really catches people off guard, because they see it as a shortcoming, or that they're somehow not a good mother, and they don't look at it in terms of there's just physiologically like your body is really off right now.
Yeah.
So those are my biggies.
No, I think that's just so important that you give women permission to ask for help, because are just conditioned, I think, to be caregivers and not
Yeah.
see it as a sign of weakness to ask for help, or like you said, something's wrong with us. But it is so common, and truly it can affect your relationship with your children. It can affect family dynamics for years to come if you, and worse if you don't ask for help. And so I would just encourage anybody listening to this who knows somebody or who is someone who is suffering in silence to please reach out to somebody who
Yeah.
can help you.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of mothers get a little, who can't ask for help, get into a little bit of a dynamic with their partner. And obviously, we can have partners of all genders, but I'm, going to use men as an example, where they can't ask their male partner for help. And so they're doing it all, but then the dad gets so disempowered because he can't do anything right, and he's not doing the diaper right, he's not doing the swaddling right, and then they get a little hands off, and then mom gets even more upset that she's doing everything. And so those
Mhm.
are like some of the relationship dynamics, and I'm not a therapist, but those are some of the like the trickle down of not being able to ask for help. And my mom was a Navy perinatology nurse.
Mhm.
And she always said dads do it different, which isn't really up to date right now, but they do.
They
And then she'd
do.
always say
Yeah.
too, honey, if they can land a plane on an aircraft carrier, like they can figure out a diaper. And I think that's like some of this we were talking about before we started recording, but this mental flexibility that has to come in when
Yeah.
becoming a new mom that
Hmm.
is really hard for a lot of women, right?
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you that, and I'm having flashbacks as a military spouse, bringing or taking care of our daughters while my husband was either deployed or in a very high demand job where he couldn't help a lot. And
Yeah.
honestly, they are not gonna probably do it like you do, but it's really important to help them demonstrate how they do it and show that it's good enough.
Totally.
And so that is so important. So I love that you bring that up because it does bring about a whole bunch of relationship dynamics. But while you were talking, I was also thinking about how new moms always have this, most often have preconceived notions of how motherhood is going to be. And more than a decade later, since I had my first daughter, that's still changing, honestly.
Hmm.
So, do you have any advice on how moms can maybe find that more flexible thinking? Because I think too that is so important in how they perceive motherhood and ask for help and approach all that is changing around them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggie for me to remember is that there's no right way, right? So just the first thing is if we can shift our frame of mind a little bit and just know that there are different ways to parent.
Hmm.
There are different ways to do everything. There are pros and cons, and there's ebbs and flows. And I think that if moms can step away from the mindset of what's the right way to get the baby to sleep through the night, what's the right way to feed them, what's the right schedule. There is no, we're all different. It's about you and your child and the temperaments of different kids too. Some babies are really amenable and just love a little more order. Other babies just don't. And so I think that we have this sort of mythical, if you find the right recipe, then it's all going to come together perfectly and you're getting enough sleep and it's all going to come together and gel. And that just isn't, that's not the rhythm of early motherhood, is what I would
Hmm.
say. The rhythm is that there are these bursts of development and then there's these little hibernations and it's this ebb and flow, right?
Hmm.
And your baby grows so rapidly that first year. And everybody, well, I hope people have heard of the term the fourth trimester, that babies really need another 3 months inside, but they wouldn't fit out. And they're just neurologically, they're still downloading and still developing. And especially those early months, they're supposed to change rapidly. They're supposed to not really have a rhythm and a schedule that's predictable. And that is okay. And that's
Hmm.
normal. And that when they cry, they need something and that they need those demands met. And that it's not always just a puzzle to figure out, but it's just the rhythm
Hmm.
of those early times. And that the second you feel like, okay, I've had my fit my stride, I've got this, they grow and change. And there's good things there's a helpful advice, right? What does a tired baby look like versus a hungry baby? Those cues tend to follow in most babies, but then what how do you manage it? What do you do? That might change. What worked for you 2 weeks ago might be different 2 weeks later. And that doesn't mean you failed or something's going wrong. It means your baby is growing and changing. And so I think just to know, like I have moms all the time who come in and they're like, we've got it figured out. And I'm like, the only thing you have figured out is that this is going to change in a couple more weeks. And that just,
Hmm.
if you can set your mindset to know that is what's normal, you're going to have such an easier time with this.
Hmm.
Um, so that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. I love that. And I'm still using that kind of framework to parent 16 and 11-year-old daughters. So it
Totally.
goes
It keeps
forward.
going. It keeps
Yeah, no, I would love to be able to say, oh, when they sleep through the night or when they turn 3 or when they get in kindergarten, it's ongoing. It's just different challenges.
Yeah. And to
Um,
drop some of the preconceived ideas,
yeah.
right? Of I'm never going to co-sleep. I'm never going to
Hmm.
have a dirty
Hmm.
car
Oh
seat.
yeah.
That's for other people. Be like, this week I'm really tired and this X, Y, and Z is how we all got enough sleep, and not
Right.
to overly go into it, right? Or
Hmm.
create this huge story of now you're going to have a 10-year-old in bed with you. No, everybody might have just needed more sleep and connection that week. And if
Right.
that doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. Put your baby somewhere else to sleep. But
Right.
what it's just, I think we create this like, I can't give them a pacifier because then they're going to have it till they're 4. And I'm like, or your baby has a really high need to suckle right now. And if we can meet that need, that will help them grow through that phase. And that's another big thing I think that I love where parenting research is going, is that like babies have needs, and the sooner we can just meet that need and they get the need met, then they can keep going, right? And so sometimes I think I see parents go, oh, I'm swinging them too much, or they'll only nap when I'm walking with them outside. And what does this mean for days, weeks, and months? And I'm like, they might just be going through a growth spurt for a couple days and really just need your connection. They might be getting sick because you also have a 3-year-old at daycare who's bringing home every germ known to man. And not to just to take it a little bit more like a day or two at a time, and
Yeah.
not expend so much mental energy about what does this mean, or
That's fabulous advice because it is true. We immediately, they're going to have the pacifier too long and therefore they're going to be not graduating high school or something.
yeah, I totally. And I'm like, maybe your nipples just need a break. Like some
Right.
babies just really need to suckle, and it doesn't have to
Right.
be you. And here's some other options. What about your pinky? What about your index finger? Like
Right.
there can be also middle grounds, but I think
Right.
that's where, yeah, I just see, and I think that some of it is just from the sleep deprivation and the sort of drive to do it right.
Mm,
Like that we don't want to do it wrong. You know what
right.
I mean? It's we might
Mhm.
not know what right is, but gosh, we don't want to be that parent that
Right.
used the passy too much.
Right.
And then this is just my own like observation and opinion. This is not grounded in anything medical. Anytime I have a kid in my office and I'm just seeing the whole family, and I have a 4 or 5-year-old with a pacifier, it's usually that is not actually a pacifier issue. That kid's like running the whole family. There's a lot more going on there than the pacifier. No.
My daughter had a pacifier until she was 5, and it's just what she needed.
Yeah,
And there
right.
were no issues. She had no teeth problems.
She
She
just
gave
needed
it
it.
up when she was ready, and
Yeah.
we're good.
Yeah, and we just don't need to like harp on it.
I've never had so many comments as like a child with a pacifier. It's like crazy.
Hmm.
But yeah, so stand your ground. I
Hmm.
love what I heard somebody say once is that you are the perfect parent for your child. They are presenting things that you need to learn and look at it as an opportunity to discover how you about yourself and how you can do things better.
And I love that you're like, yeah, my kid had one until she was 5, and that's what she needed. And you're
Yeah.
really comfortable and confident in that. When my oldest, I think we stopped breastfeeding somewhere during between the first and second year. And I just really felt like he still needed a bottle at night. He needed to suckle.
Yeah. Oh
And all
yeah.
everyone's no bottles after age 1 and da da da. But he needed that. He needed
Yeah.
that coziness and that nurturing. And
Yeah.
just to be like, yeah, that's what we did. And that's okay.
Mhm.
And not to judge or shame or
No, totally. Well, to shift gears a little bit, I know you serve highly ambitious, driven women, often who own their own businesses, many of which are listeners to this podcast. And so let's talk about those women who may own their own business and be, blindsided by motherhood. How can they approach things when they've been able to navigate business and been able to achieve so many things, and then they feel a little stumped by motherhood?
yeah, I think that's a great question. I see this all the time. I work with a lot of women who are super successful entrepreneurs, really driven, really good at problem solving, and then they have a baby. And it's like the baby doesn't know the net worth of their company. The baby doesn't know what they've achieved. The baby doesn't know how many staff they've managed, and babies just do not bend to our will.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they think if they can get the right app or this or that, then it'll all be okay. Motherhood is really just about letting go, surrendering, letting the laundry pile up, letting go of expectations. And so it's like everything that you've been able to muscle through, work through, hire out, put money towards the problem. Who's the best person to solve this? It's none of that tends to work in early motherhood. And there's just this massive amount of like surrender that has to happen. And I think that is really hard to relinquish control and to surrender. And I think it can feel really scary for a lot of those women. And the other thing I see is that some women have a lot of conflict about how much then their work is still important to them. Sometimes it really starts diminishing in terms of they really enjoying this new role. And then other women feel really guilty because they love their work and they're really ready to be a mom and get back to work. And they feel guilty because people are asking them, don't you just wish you could just stay at home forever? And they're like, no, I don't want to do that. And that's okay too, right? That's part of that
Yeah.
no right or wrong. But I think it's just allowing yourself to have this flexibility. And then also too, I find anytime I work with a woman who's self-employed and they tell me how long they're taking for maternity leave, I'm like, are you really taking that time off? Are you still checking work emails? Are you still doing prospective client calls? And I'd say 8 out of 10 times they're like, I'm still on call for emergencies and checking messages and maybe lining up a few clients for when I get back. And so they're still going, right? And so I really, and I'm self-employed, so I understand. When I had my kids, I had a big medical practice that I ran with a ton of staff, and I was one of those women, so I understand it intimately. But I think that really I encourage them to give themselves at least the first month where you're like, I'm not actually answering any work email. I'm not even going to look at it, to just give some period of time where you're completely unavailable and just give yourself that mental break, because I think that is really hard to always have one part of your brain thinking about your company.
No, I think that's wise advice, and it's so hard. But I agree. I think if you can try to accept that challenge to give yourself at least a month, and then two, just taking things back incrementally and not
Mm-hmm.
trying to maybe go back full time all the
Yeah.
way or do everything that you once did, because rarely can you be the mom that you want to be and also work as you used to in whatever capacity the same way.
Yeah. And your baby might wake you up every 2 or 3 hours while you're
Right.
going back to this. I
Yeah.
try to explain that to women when I do get to coach with them when they're pregnant, of
Mm,
like, how can we set up your return to work plan? That is something I love doing with women, is like,
mm,
what are the demands of your job? What does it look
mhm,
like? How are you feeding baby? What do you want to accomplish?
mhm.
And can we make you a really realistic, sustainable plan? What's the temperament of your kids? Are they sleeping? Have they been sick 100 times in the first few months? And help them set themselves up for success
Mhm.
with a realistic plan. Because I think you just hit on something really critical that I see, is they go from like 0 to 90 of, I'm going to come back and take it all back. And
Mhm.
for me, if women are hearing this and they're pregnant and you're running your own company, it's think about what 25% can you take back when you come back for the first couple weeks?
Mhm.
Then can you come up to 50, 70? What is your to be your cruising altitude? What can you hand off now in pregnancy that you
Mhm.
can leave handed off to somebody? Like how, because I think a lot of women are like, I just need someone to cover me for 3 or 4 months and then I'm coming back and I'll do it all. But
Right.
maybe to ease into this, like, how can I have a more
Yeah.
gradual return? And even things like if we're physically gone from baby for 40 hours, we're home all the time to 40 hours. And those babies tend to do what we call reverse cycling, and they want to be up all night to get their
Mhm.
mom time in, whether they're
Yeah.
breastfeeding or bottle feeding. They
Yeah.
have their own way of getting their needs met. So then you have
Mhm.
this woman who's going back to full time, and this baby that's become suddenly way more demanding,
Mhm.
and it's just a tricky time. And
Yeah.
so my ideal is if people, and I understand the financial and economic realities of where we are right now, do not afford everybody this luxury. And I really hear that
Mhm.
and I understand that. But I also tell people too, I highly doubt that on our deathbeds, we go, oh, it was that extra 4 weeks of leave. I never bought a house. I couldn't send the kids to college. I wasn't able to retire. In the moment, it's so critical. But I think
Mhm.
if you net out 4 or 6 weeks at the end of your days, I don't think anybody ever regrets trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
And and I think anybody can go back every other day for shorter days for the first week or two, especially if you're breastfeeding still and you're pumping. And pumping like jogging, like we get better at it the more we do it. It's not like a faucet that you turn on and off. And it just, there's some nuances to it. So if you can
Mhm.
do every other day and shorter days, maybe 6 hours, and then you have that
Mhm.
next day off to reconnect with baby and then go back. And a lot of moms are like, oh, I'm just going to hammer it out Tuesday through Thursday and do 10-hour days. I'll get in my 30 hours and then I'll have 4 days off. And it's brutal. It takes them
Yeah.
2 days just to recover from that. And so those are a lot of the like nitty gritty things that I work with women of like, how can we really make this sustainable for you?
And I think this is so important too, because I think we naturally want to rely on the women in our families, like our moms or our aunts or grandmothers. But we're really redefining motherhood and working and contributing in a
Mm-hmm.
way that I think a coach like yourself would be so important to really go, okay, here's the reality.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
Well, to
So
help
we,
find some balance, because I think
right.
like the generation before me
Yeah.
really prided themselves on we can do it all,
Right.
right? We can have a career, we can have the kids. And as we were like, that's how women are supposed to be. So many people in my generation went for it and we're like, this sucks. It's like having two full-time jobs. Like
Yeah.
jokes may be on us. And then
Plus,
how do
yeah.
you find the balance?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think it's doable, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that people need some help with what are some different plans and the
Mm-hmm.
flexibility to like try something for a couple weeks, right? And be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this isn't working. I'm going to do
Yeah.
something different.
Yeah. If you're not already a business owner, motherhood was my introduction to entrepreneurship because it helped me find that balance because I didn't want to have a typical 9 to 5. I wanted to be the mom I wanted to be. And I also wanted to be able to earn income and share my gifts with the world.
Yeah.
So you and I were talking earlier about how you had to learn how to create a business that fit your lifestyle. And that's so important for any mom. So, can you give us some insight on how you did that and what has helped you learn?
Yeah. It's really scary.
Yeah,
It's scary going outside of the norm
just
and
like motherhood, it's scary.
totally. It's scary. It takes a lot of, I think, a lot more of the personal development work than
Yeah.
people realize getting
Oh,
into
yeah.
it about your mindset and what you're willing to do. And
Hmm.
it's not as clear of a course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I used to run a big clinic and have a lot of staff and a business partner. And I thought that I'd really enjoy training other women to do the work that I did. And part of the problem is a lot of female providers who are interested in working with moms and babies want to have their own family or want to work part time and be a mom. And I was like, this is great. I want to support you. But it's really hard to run a business where everybody's, oh, and then I don't know if I'm going to come back. And I just, yeah, after I had kids, I was like, I want to be able to scale what I do and help more people, but also be able to be there for my kids. So I ended
Mhm.
up a couple years ago selling my big clinic and then starting over as just a one woman show. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I had to choose to leave the insurance world, which really pained me because my undergraduate work is in medical ethics and I really believe in good quality healthcare for all people.
Mhm.
But the healthcare model and the insurance based model is so dysfunctional that wanted me to see everybody for 6 visits in 15 minutes. And if you're threw your back out shoveling, that's reasonable and you're 18. But when you're dealing with somebody who had a vaginal delivery, a grade 4 tear, they're having nursing issues, like you can't even scratch the surface. And so I had to step away from that model and figure out how I can meet my own needs of having a sustainable business, but also meet the needs of my community. And so now, because I don't have to be beholden to the insurance companies, I have more time, I volunteer my time. I run a postpartum support group in my community. I'm able to have a sliding scale. I'm able to still meet the needs of anybody who wants to see me, but also take care of myself. And so that was the biggest stressor in my world was conforming to the box that the insurance companies wanted. And again, this anybody who works in women's health will tell you the same thing, that it's like all of our algorithms, I feel like, are designed for care for men.
Hmm.
And one of my good friends who's an OBGYN, she's like, the freaking pre-auth companies think they know who needs a hysterectomy better than I do. And you would think that's a fairly straightforward, like if the doctor says you need it, and they tie her hands. And with feeding issues, it's even worse. And so I had to step away from all of that. So I became a one-woman show and then I launched one-on-one coaching, and I'm developing a class called Breastfeeding 911. That's for women at 2 a.m. when things are falling apart and you don't know what to do. That will just be available on an evergreen basis because there's a lot of kittens and roses and it should all just come together and the baby opens wide. But when that's not happening, nobody knows what to do. And then also building group coaching out. And so that's all
Hmm.
coming down the road within the next year or two. And my lesson that I had to learn was really to give myself some space
Hmm.
to work on one thing at a time, get good at one thing at a time, and just know that everything happens more slowly. And that I think for those of us who are driven and entrepreneurial, that can be frustrating,
Hmm.
but I wasn't willing to work how I worked when my kids were little. I'd get up
Hmm.
at 5 a.m. and work on my business until everybody got up and get them off to school. And once they were down, pull out my computer again. And now I get up, but I like have coffee with my partner and we connect, or I meditate or get a little exercise in. And that's not to say that sometimes those early mornings don't happen, but if you're going to take care of yourself and honor your mental health, I think it's okay for people to hear that sometimes things just happen slower, but that's all right to have realistic expectations.
No, that's so wise. And it's so true. It's we put all these expectations on ourselves without considering what our limitations are. And not that limitations are bad, but it's a season of life. Usually,
Hmm.
depending on how old our children are, what their activities are, or lots of different things, our health, their health, so many things. I am so glad to have you on the podcast to share this important topic. And if you wanted listeners to take away one or two things to stick with them from this conversation, what do you think that would be?
I think just to have some self-compassion,
Mm.
right? And just treat yourself kindly and tell yourself you're doing a good job and that
Right.
there's no right way to do this. You're not doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And to just listen if you're feeling frazzled and you're feeling overwhelmed, take a deep breath, listen to that, and
Hmm.
figure out what type of help you may need. Do you need to talk to your doctor? Do you need to talk to a therapist? Do you need a coach? Do you just need to go for a walk? Like, how can you help yourself and
Hmm.
not just browbeat yourself as a mom and then push it aside? But I think that if we could all add a little more self-compassion into early motherhood and give ourselves a pat on the back and give ourselves a little hug
Hmm.
mentally, I think that would go a long way for new moms.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it absolutely would. And then too, just like you were saying, no, the mom judges are not going to show up, or if they do, those aren't your people.
Yeah, totally.
It's we just put all of these expectations on ourselves, and yeah, we just have to give ourselves permission to figure it out and trust ourselves, and you absolutely can. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I'm sure listeners are going to want to connect with you and learn more. So where can they do that?
My website is drgerbi.com. So it's drgerbi.com. I have a lot more about my coaching on there. I'm on Instagram at postpartum mothering mentor and soon to be on TikTok. We'll probably put those details when you release everything below,
All
but
right.
I just can't thank you enough. And yeah, I think that it's such a huge change of life that I want to see more women have more resources to lean
Right.
into. I think that is really would just be so pivotal for so many of us and so many more women.
Yeah, and getting your confidence as a mother together, especially in early childhood, can just really propel you and fuel whatever you want to do in the future and just change you so much for the better. And so I'm so glad you're helping women do that. So thank you
Thank
for being
you.
on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.